We need King Conan. It has it all. War, diplomacy, sorcery, intrigue, familial drama, hot Amazons, more war, but in siege form, even more war, but in naval form, and of course, battles against giant monsters of every weight class, from engorged trouser snakes to mini fridge-sized Godzillas. Oh, and even more hot Amazons, this time in BDSM clothing. Basically, it is Game of Thrones, but better in every single solitary way that matters. Now, you may be wondering what brought on this sudden New Year's diversion. Well, it is, as mentioned, a new year, 2025. Happy New Year's, everyone. And it is promising to be a good one. There is genuine hope for the future glimmering on the horizon. That is not exactly a state of affairs that any one of us is overly familiar with. So, I figured I would start a little conversation on what we would all like to see in the entertainment of tomorrow. Or, well, tomorrow 3 to 4 years from now. What with the average development time of a TV show or movie these days, but you get my drift. So, why King Conan then? It's hardly the most recognizable property, even being a bit of a subset of the more well-known Conan comics and books. Why not just simply do good old Conan? Well, it is because King Conan teaches many lessons that we desperately need today, as the last 10 years have been hard on entertainment in terms of culture, morality, and, well, quality. I made this comparison in the video about Mrs. Freeze, but skipping back and forth in between Batman the Animated Series and Harley Quinn, no exaggeration, it really is like eating a sirloin steak the one moment and having a morbidly obese Bulgarian brothel matron vomiting down your airpipe the next. All the way up to and including the aftertaste. So, let us begin with the obvious qualities of any show centered around Conan: sword and sorcery action. Now I can hear some of you young whippersnappers asking what by the Barbarian's shaved balls even is sword and sorcery. It sounds cool. That's because it is cool. But in all due fairness, the kind of coolness that your grandfather was probably more closely acquainted with than any current generation. As sadly, it is a subgenre of fiction planted so firmly on the endangered species list, it makes an impotent panda look positively thriving by comparison. As the golden age of sword and sorcery is a solid 40 years plus in the rearview mirror by now. Beyond even my time. Though, if you are willing to stretch the definition to the breaking point, possibly beyond, then you could also include The Lord of the Rings in that definition as a sword and sorcery movie and series, but that is a Lily Phillips-sized stretch. As usually, the term is applied to stories focusing in on the heroic journeys of specific characters like Conan or Sinbad, though this usually also includes an immediate cast of surrounding, supporting characters. A good example would be, say, Xena, warrior princess, as Xena is pretty much always the focus, but she also brings along Gabriella, or more rarely, Joxa, and she has a number of recurring big-name enemies like Callisto or Caesar, played by Carl Urban, by the way. And Xena is still surprisingly popular to this day. In fact, there was an attempt to try and reboot it in 2015. Oh boy. That would have been quite the show. Xena, warrior feminist. But thank all that is holy, that singularity-dense monstrosity died on the negotiation table. Anywho, enough waffling about why King Conan, was the question I asked like a minute ago. Firstly, because Conan is a strong male lead. Quite probably the strongest male lead. And in an era where even Brad Pitt wears a skirt, by crom do we need one. And Conan is pretty much the absolute peak of everything the current year has told us is toxic masculinity. Brash, utterly self-assured, and with enough beef and barbarian cunning to back it all up. Conan has fought demons, monsters, mortals, and stranger things besides. He's been a barbarian, a mercenary, a thief, a pirate, a general, and eventually a king by his own hand. And it may therefore seem tempting to make a show about that Conan, his countless adventures leading up to his ascension to the throne of Aquilonia. But it is that last role that has tested him by far the most harshly. As king, Conan transcends the role of simple big guy with a metal stick. As a feudal monarch, of course, has to concern himself with matters of strategy, diplomacy, infrastructure, family, economy, and finally, of course, combat as well. And whilst Conan has a masterful grasp of the latter one, he remains fairly inexpert at many of the preceding ones, which grants his royal version incredible depth that is largely lacking in his younger self, as it provides opportunity to humanize Conan, to have him fail in a way that is not derogatory or destructive to the character, but in fact constructive. It allows him to grow and become better still through self-improvement. It also teaches some valuable moral lessons too, and some subtle ones as well. For example, the tale of the king and the Baron Emilius of Bosonia. The Baron was a staunch opponent of Conan's reign, oft criticizing him and working against his efforts in court. More than once, the king had wanted to just straight up kill the man, but the civilized laws of Aquilonia would of course not allow this. And more importantly, Queen Zenobia would not allow it. There is yet another wonderful reason, by the way, for doing King Conan, as here we see a relationship with some depth. Neither one seeking to upstage the other. Conan and Zenobia are complementary. Zenobia smoothing down the barbarian's rough edges and helping him exist in civilized society. Whereas Conan, meanwhile, gives steel to Zenobia, a courtesan come queen. And there is genuine love there as well, both risking their lives for one another, and often needing to engage in give and take. Neither one can have it all their way, and both parties, both Conan and Zenobia, must sacrifice some of their happiness in order to continue to coexist, even if the balance between a barbarian and a courtesan will always be a difficult one. Especially as there are many temptations for a king, and a fair few for a queen as well. But to continue the point, through evil machinations, it appears as if one of Conan's children have been killed. And we will get to the family bit in a moment, as it too is a wellspring of interesting drama and morality. But for now, evil plots, son dead, and the Baron Emilius is framed for the deed. Conan is all too willing to believe it, as he has a long history of antagonism with the Baron, and in a fit of rage storms off to arrest or kill the Baron, driven by rage and hurt rather than reason. The Baron is arrested and put to trial. He's not expecting a fair one, and Conan is not really intent on giving him either, as Conan is absolutely convinced of the man's guilt and dearly wants him dead. And so he agrees to a trial by water, a civilized form of trial that Conan is none too fond of, as the Baron will be bound and weighed down. Emilius is then tossed into the sea. If he floats, with Mitra, the goddess's help, he is innocent. If he sinks, which he inevitably will, due obviously to the weight of his sins, as the priests say, and not in any way, fluid dynamics. Now, Conan, being something along the lines of 60 years old at this point, has both seen and killed his fair share of gods, and more than his fair share of drownings as well. He knows this is bullshit, but he goes through with it, because he really wants Emilius dead. And if the laws of this civilized nation would allow him to kill him, even in such a dishonorable fashion, then he is tempted to allow it to happen. It is only when the man is all but dead that Conan can no longer stomach it and leaps in to save him. Why? Had he planned this all along to see if he could get some confession from the man? Was this some sort of ploy? No. Conan's not really that subtle of a character, but he is a complex character. He has flaws aplenty. He's willing to murder this man on flimsy evidence at best, and would indeed have preferred to do so by his own sword. He hates him so much that he was almost willing to forsake his own beliefs and principles to have the man drowned with the thinnest possible veneer of justice. And even knowing that everyone else would have accepted this, as this was within the rules of Aquilonia, in the end, his principles win out. And is Conan rewarded for his stand on principle? Hell no. Emilius hates him. Now, once he did so loyally, legally, within the confines of the Aquilonian court system. He was the opposition, but he was the loyal opposition. But almost getting drowned for a crime he did not commit, that understandably changed all of it. Later, he is released from his prison cell and tries to kill the king. But Conan defeats him and demands he surrender, offering Emilius a way to reconcile with him. Emilius instead drops himself onto his own sword, laughing as he dies, knowing that nobody will ever believe that Conan was not the one to kill him, causing enormous damage to Aquilonian internal politics. And this will of course spiral into even greater concerns, as King Conan now not only has personal enemies like Toth-Amon, but national enemies thronging in at Aquilonia's border. And this is where we get a lot of action, a lot of fantastic action as well. As in the King Conan series, you pretty much cover everything, from small adventures to skirmishing parties to cavalry battles to ambushes to sieges to naval war to mass invasions. You've got absolutely everything you could desire here out of an action show, with plenty of personal conflict and drama to keep it interesting on a more grounded level in between the battles. It is in many ways Game of Thrones-like, but nowhere near as absolutely reliant upon the shock moments, and every character being the absolute worst conceivable version of themselves. In fact, it was one rare indulgence in this villainy purely for villainy sake that was one of the weakest points of King Conan. As now, we can discuss a little bit about Conan's family. He had several children with his queen Zenobia, 2 sons and a daughter. His favorite by far was his firstborn son, Prince Con, or Conan II. He was his father's son in every way, brave, strong, and independent-minded, and can also serve as a wonderful young Conan insert for when you want a bit more of a basic sword and sorcery adventure, allowing us to explore a younger, more naive Conan that gets screwed over by clever tavern girls, for example, without needing to build down Conan himself. Conan also had a daughter, Princess Radegund, who is a rather interesting character in today's environment. Were she a strong, modern-day female character, she'd no doubt be swinging around a sword and refusing to get married. but not so in King Conan. For whilst she has a lot of her father in her as well, she knows how to fight, she's always wanted to be trained in how to fight, but she nevertheless understands that her duty as a princess is first and foremost to the kingdom. She will be married off, and it will likely be a strategic marriage. And whilst Radegund is not happy about that, she understands why it is necessary, and she is willing to commit to that sacrifice. Meanwhile, compare that to a current year-strong female character, like Hera of the recent War of the Rohirrim anime. She will not do that, even if she knows it will cost the lives of countless of her countrymen. You tell me, which one of these two is the strongest female character? But this is a little bit of a sidestep, really, because I want to talk about Conan's second son, Taurus. For he has very little of his father in him. He even failed the Chimerian test of manhood, where the young boy is asked to place his hand on a chopping block, after which Conan will swing an axe at it, missing by a hair's breadth. Prince Conan, of course, passed it easily, but Taurus did not. He withdrew his hand. And ever since, Conan, well, he not even so much treated Prince Taurus poorly as he simply ignored his entire existence. This did not exactly, endear him to Taurus, who then continued to do things specifically because he knew his dad didn't like it. Because, at the very least, if he could receive his father's disapproval, well, that was more attention from his old man than he could normally expect. Young Taurus is probably one of my favorite characters in the King Conan comic book series, or more correctly, his second iteration, as there was basically kind of a soft pseudo reboot of King Conan near the end of its run. See, initially, Taurus was just evil. He was just a bad guy and allied himself with Conan's enemies. And he would eventually be betrayed by them and killed by them as well. This was because he was not actually King Conan's son, who had actually been abducted and replaced with an imposter at his birth. This meant that Conan was, well, largely relieved of any responsibility for screwing up his parentage, and Taurus became just a bad guy, just a villainous character that even his mother only mourned for briefly. But in the second iteration, he is King Conan's son. He even on occasion attempts to do good, because he figures, hey, maybe that'll finally get me some attention from father as well. But after a life of mischief, doing good is difficult for Taurus. Plus, he genuinely does have far more of a talent for magic than he does for swordplay. He very early on becomes a surprisingly proficient magician, in fact, and eventually ends up saving Conan and the entire kingdom of Aquilonia, despite being mistrusted whilst he does so, and despite not really receiving much in the way of plaudits or thank yous or anything good afterwards, mimicking the earlier King Conan story about how good deeds do not always go rewarded. It also highlights yet again King Conan's flaws. He is in fact not a perfect father, not by any stretch of the imagination. He is what he is, a barbarian. He has his own beliefs and his own ideals, and they are firmly rooted within him. This also leads to a bit of a break with his favoured son, Prince Conan, as well, as he is magically teleported away to the far-off land of Cathay, where Conan had also been in a quest to save his wife many years earlier. where Prince Conan runs into his, bastard brother, whom Conan sired with a local woman whilst trying to rescue his wife. A wife who, also occasionally makes doughy eyes at the helm. There's a lot of familial drama surrounding King Conan, and most of it is, well, the kind of familial drama you'd expect to be in a family of royalty like this, particularly with a character like King Conan at the center. A man who, even having finally achieved everything he could ever have dreamed of, a kingdom, a family, a beautiful queen, etc., now really just kinda wants to go camping. And it is all of these little things, the dramas, the conflicts, and the flaws that make King Conan and his family interesting. Yet none of them are overwhelming. None of them make them into simply just bad people, with the potential exception of the first iteration of Towers. And this makes them sympathetic. It makes their growth interesting. And it helps ground the wider epic story of war, diplomacy, intrigue, sorcery, etc. in something more human. Actually human. Not shooting your dad whilst he's taking a shit, like in Game of Thrones. Or shagging atop your dead son's casket. GOT did some things right, and a lot more things wrong. And the last thing we need right now is another dark simply for the sake of being masochistically dark show. We need something with morals, something with a point, something with growth in it. And King Conan can offer that. Now, there are some problems with this concept, chief amongst them finding somebody to actually play Conan. Basically, we're going to have to find some 60-year-old dude with a body to equal that of Arnold Schwarzenegger in the 1980s, and he's going to have to be able to act. Yeah, it could be slim pickings. Honestly, I'm half tempted to suggest we simply just bring on Arnold again. Throw on a muscle suit and a little bit of CGI to, help with the visuals, and voila! It would, if nothing else, be one hell of a crowd pleaser. And I'm sure Arnold himself would be thrilled to take up the role that he teased at the end of the Conan movies. And hey, Sylvester Stallone is still doing stuff and still looking good whilst doing it in Tulsa King. So why not Arnold, eh? And then all we need is a younger Arnold Schwarzenegger to play Prince Conan. And, I mean, hey, if you've watched some of Arnold's earliest performances, you know that all we really need at that point is a bodybuilder, and the acting, it can be added in afterwards. Maybe we could even have a guest appearance from Red Sonja. She's got a movie coming out soon, supposedly, anyways. I don't think any actual footage or media has emerged from the alleged Red Sonja movie in production, but supposedly there is one in shooting right now. Is it going to be good? Well, if nothing else, it should certainly be a hearty reminder of why we usually do the main characters first, and then the supporting cast after having proven the success of the core concept. But details. All that really matters at the end of the day is whether or not the audience wants to see it. So, what do you guys all think? Would you like to see a King Conan movie, or more likely a television series, as it would be cheaper and easier to recoup one's investment with? Or would you rather prefer to see a young Conan, perhaps? Or maybe even you have some other sword and sorcery setting you'd like to see instead. Personally, if King Conan is off the table, I would love to see the Sword of Truth series from Terry Goodkin be given a proper shot. Now, it actually did receive a television series back in 2008, I think? Very, very late 2010s. And you know what? It was not terrible. It was, for the time, actually quite quality, but we were frankly swimming in quality at the time and were thus unable to realize how good we had it. If the Sword of Truth series or the Legend of the Seeker came out today, I think it would actually probably do fairly well. It would be viewed as a bit corny, but with its heart in the right place. And man, I would love to see a return of sword and sorcery in general. Xena Warrior Princess reboot? Absolutely. Hercules? Bring it on. Maybe, just maybe, we could even get some Cool the Conqueror. Now we're getting a little bit too optimistic, I think, but it's nice to dream, isn't it, now that there is, again, a little bit of hope on the horizon. Until next time, I've been Arch. Thank you very much for watching, and I hope to see you all again soon. Till then, have a good day.